Welcome back to Arkham Lore. Tonight we follow the story of a man who was already breaking long before the chemicals touched him, already hollowing out long before the fall, already rehearsing the laugh that would eventually become all he had left. A man who was loyal and patient and meticulous and violent in that order, until Gotham's machinery processed him completely and handed back something it had never intended to create. This is a story about the space between what we do and what we become, about how a city that runs on crime recruits men to serve it, uses them with precision, and discards them without ceremony, and then acts genuinely surprised when what it threw away finds a way to come back in a form it cannot contain. It is a story about ambition, about service, about the particular madness of being extremely good at a job you should never have taken. As you settle into your comfortable space tonight, let these words carry you through a story that becomes stranger and darker and more human. The further it goes, drawn from the greatest collection of Batman mythology ever assembled into a single game, told through a character who has always deserved to be understood rather than simply feared. This is a story about what a city does to a man when it uses him completely, and what that man becomes in the dark when there is no one left to perform for. Our story begins not with the fall into chemicals, and not with the grin that no surgeon could remove, but with a gun and a knight, and a boy who refused to look away. The city of Gotham at night carries itself like something that knows it cannot be saved. The towers crowd together above the streets, their windows lit or dark in no particular pattern, the architecture a chaos of ambition and neglect. Beautiful from far away, oppressive from within. The kind of city that makes men feel simultaneously insignificant and implicated. The rivers on either side run dark and cold. The rain, when it comes, does not clean anything. It just moves the grime around, distributes it more evenly, spreads what was concentrated in one place across a wider area, and then evaporates and leaves everything exactly as corrupted as it was before. Crime Alley earned its name the way all of Gotham's worst places earn their names, not from a single event, but from an accumulation of them, from enough bad things happening in one narrow strip of street that the residents stopped pretending it was anything else and simply called it what it was. The name appeared on official maps eventually. Nobody in Gotham seemed to find that remarkable. On this particular night, the street was quiet. The way certain places are quiet when they are holding their breath, waiting for a specific thing to arrive. A family turned the corner. Thomas Wayne walked with his wife Martha on one side, his son Bruce on the other, the way a man walks when the two most important things in his life are within arm's reach and he is aware of it. He had the bearing of a man who was genuinely good, in the specific, uncomplicated sense of a person who had not yet been asked to pay for that quality, in a city that had never valued it. He had enough resources to insulate himself from the worst consequences of Gotham's nature, and the particular tragedy of Thomas Wayne was that those resources were extensive enough to make the danger feel abstract, feel distant, feel like something that happened to other people in other alleys on other nights. Bruce walked beside him, looking at the city the way children look at things they do not yet understand, with attention and curiosity and the specific quality of observation that has not yet learned to protect itself from what it sees. What none of them saw was Jack Napier. He moved through the alley with the unhurried purpose of a professional, the specific ease of a man for whom this was work, routine work, executed with the same discipline he brought to every engagement. He was Carmine Falcone's best operative, his #1 guy, in Falcone's own language. That title carried weight in Gotham's underworld, the way judicial appointments carry weight in legitimate society. You did not achieve it by being sentimental, or reckless, or uncertain. You achieved it by being efficient, reliable, and completely controlled. He had been given a job. The specific details of who had ordered Thomas Wayne's death and what Wayne had done or threatened to do that made the order necessary. Those threads run deeper into Gotham's corruption than this story follows. What matters is that Jack had the job, had accepted it with the professional composure of a man who had accepted many similar jobs and had arrived to do it. He stepped out of the dark. The gun was already drawn, already aimed, already decided. And here is what the game shows you in that moment, in the specific framing of that scene that most people do not sit with long enough. Jack Napier did not look like he was enjoying it. He did not look like a monster savoring a moment it had been building toward. He looked like a man doing work, competent and cold and efficient, and somewhere inside that efficiency, aware enough of what he was doing to have long since decided not to think about it. He told himself it was business. He told himself the alley, the job, the family, the boy standing there watching, that all of it was just another transaction in a city that ran entirely on transactions. He told himself this the way that professionals tell themselves things when what they are doing does not bear close examination, with the same careful flatness that allowed him to do the job and walk away from it and sleep correctly afterward. He stole Martha Wayne's pearls. He shot Thomas. He shot Martha. And then he turned to the boy. Bruce Wayne did not run. He did not cry out, did not collapse, did not look away. He stood in that alley with his parents at his feet and stared at Jack Napier with an expression that Jack had not anticipated and could not entirely process. Not fear, not anger, not the animal grief that usually came from a child in that position, but something closer to comprehension. Something that looked, in the darkness of Crime Alley, like a person absorbing exactly what they needed to see in order to become something else entirely. The expression was as permanent as a scar. The boy was filing it away. Jack raised the gun. Then, because the moment demanded something, because the silence of it was beginning to have weight, he said what he always said. The line he had invented for himself, the line he said to every person he was about to hurt, the line he claimed to use because he liked the sound of it. "You ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight?" He asked it to every victim. He had made it up himself. He said he just liked how it sounded. But there was something in the way he asked it in that alley, to that specific boy with those specific eyes. That wasn't entirely performance. Something that wanted a real answer. Something underneath the professionalism that was asking, without knowing how to ask it more directly, whether any of this could possibly mean anything. Before he could do anything further, Carmine Falcone's limousine rolled to the curb. The door opened. Jack looked at Bruce Wayne one last time, at the expression that wasn't flinching, and got into the car. The city swallowed him whole. One small boy knelt in the dark, and something that would outlast everything Jack Napier was about to do with the rest of his life began. What Jack Napier could not know, what none of them could know in that alley on that night, was that the boy who had refused to flinch was not going to stay in the dark. He was going to leave Gotham. He was going to travel to the most extreme places on Earth and train under the most dangerous teacher alive. He was going to return to this city wearing a symbol. And he was going to encounter Jack Napier not once more, but 3 times. Each encounter more consequential than the last. Each time the gap between them narrowing to the width of an arm's reach. And each time, neither man would know what connected them at the root. But that was years away. Jack had work to do. Gotham still had more of him to use. For years, Jack Napier performed. That is the specific word for it. Not worked, not served, but performed. Because what Jack did for Carmine Falcone was not merely the physical work of enforcement and elimination and precision violence. What he performed was the role of a man who was content to be someone else's instrument, who found meaning in hierarchy, who accepted the position of second, consistently, professionally, without visible resentment, in exchange for access to the power that the position adjacent to the top provided. Gotham in those years was Falcone's city in every meaningful sense. The Iceberg Lounge anchored the legitimate facade. The judges, the commissioners, the inspectors, all of them threaded through the same web, all of them receiving Falcone's consideration in exchange for Falcone's continuation. The whole structure was elegant in the way that things built with money and patience and the specific wisdom of long-running corruption are elegant. It had lasted for decades. It was designed to last indefinitely. Jack moved through it like blood moves through a body, necessary, invisible, flowing exactly where the system directed. He watched everything. He watched with the eye of an architect, studying a building he has been hired to eventually dismantle, noting the load-bearing elements, identifying the structural dependencies, mapping exactly which supports would need to fail, and in precisely what sequence for the whole edifice to come down. He noted which of Falcone's alliances were genuine and which were maintained by fear. He noted which of Falcone's lieutenants had loyalty and which had only proximity. He noted where the money actually moved versus where it was reported to move. And in the delta between those two numbers, he found the fault lines. He did not share these observations with anyone. He watched Falcone age into his authority, watched the crime lord settle ever deeper into the comfort of an empire running on momentum accumulated over decades. He watched how Falcone dealt with challenges, not through ingenuity, but through resources and reputation, through the weight of a name that had become so established it no longer required active maintenance. And Jack assessed, with the cold precision that had made him valuable, that what Falcone had built was magnificent and brittle, magnificent and past its moment, magnificent and occupied by a man who could no longer imagine that it could end. Jack could imagine it, in considerable detail, with specific satisfaction. There was a point. The game does not mark it, does not flag it with dialogue or a cutscene, where Jack Napier stopped being Falcone's instrument and started being his own project. The decision is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It is the kind of internal shift that develops slowly and then completely, like a structural failure that accumulates over months before the entire wall comes down in a single moment. He left Falcone's service, quietly, professionally, with what appeared to be appropriate notice. He called himself Red Hood One. The Red Hood name carried weight in Gotham's criminal mythology, a disguise identity passed between criminals for generations, a persona worn for deniability, belonging to no one specifically and therefore claimable by anyone who needed it. Jack claimed it differently. He did not wear it to hide. He wore it to declare, to announce through the symbolic weight of the name that what was coming was not a new crime lord filling a vacancy. It was something the vacancy had always been waiting for. He built the gang around the Red Hood persona rather than around Jack Napier. His men were loyal to the idea of the Red Hood, to the symbolism and ambition it represented, rather than to the history of the man underneath it. This was deliberate. A gang organized around a persona could survive what Jack already knew was coming: the total erosion of who Jack Napier had been in service of what he intended to become. He told himself he had outgrown Carmine Falcone. He told himself this was ambition completing its natural arc, a man finding the level he was always meant to occupy. The logical conclusion of years of patient observation and flawless execution. But there was something underneath that explanation, something that ran darker and less symmetrical, something that looked less like ambition fulfilled, and more like anger that had been professionally managed for too long, held under the surface with enormous effort, maintained with the specific discipline of a man who understood that an instrument showing its true feelings becomes useless. He had killed for Falcone, had done the irreversible things, the things that could not be named in polite company and could not be undone in any other company. He had shaped this city's present in ways the newspapers would never accurately trace, had created conditions that would ripple forward through Gotham's history for decades. And Falcone had paid him and used him and valued him the way powerful men value their most reliable tools, with appreciation that never looked directly at the cost. Jack had not expected intimacy from Falcone. He was not sentimental about it, but he had expected, somewhere beneath the professional compact, that the work would carry weight, that being the best at what he did would give him a position in the world that outlasted the last job. It did not. It gave him a paycheck and a placement in a hierarchy that ended at Falcone and went nowhere beyond. The Red Hood Gang was Jack's answer to that discovery, not the sophisticated answer, not the emotionally mature answer, but the honest one. The answer that said, without apology, that a man who had given Gotham this much of himself was owed more than a position in someone else's story. TL. And here is what most people miss about the Red Hood persona. Jack was not trying to escape who he was. He was trying to become who he had always believed he should have been. The gang was not a fresh start. It was an argument. Jack's argument, made with violence and architecture, that Gotham's criminal world was ready to evolve beyond old men in expensive restaurants dividing up territory. He was not running from Falcone's shadow. He was building something large enough to cast its own. The man who had entered Falcone's world as a controlled professional instrument, precise and patient and loyal by contract, was gone. In his place stood Red Hood 1, a man who had studied the entire criminal architecture of Gotham and concluded that none of it was sufficient, and that he was the one to build something better. What that something better would require the city to absorb in order for his argument to be made was a question he had stopped asking. He had a meeting to attend. He had a payment to deliver. And he had a fish in a suitcase that was going to change everything. What would that fish tell Falcone about what Jack had become, and what was already waiting inside those teddy bears? The Iceberg Lounge at night wore its elegance the way Gotham always wore its finest things, loudly enough to announce itself, and with just enough genuine quality to make you believe it if you didn't look too closely at the edges. The lighting was warm and controlled, the specific kind of lighting that makes everyone in the room look more significant than they feel. The bar ran the full length of the far wall, tended by staff who had mastered the art of being simultaneously invisible and attentive. The tables were occupied by men who dealt in the kind of influence that has very specific dietary requirements, who needed a setting that provided both the appearance of legitimacy and the absolute assurance of privacy. At the center of it all, more gravitational field than physical presence, sat Carmine Falcone. Selina Kyle moved through the room with a tray in one hand and her attention distributed everywhere except where it appeared to be concentrated. She worked the lounge the way certain people work rooms, using the service role as a lens, collecting information with the ease of someone for whom it had long since stopped requiring conscious effort. She was running her own game on the margins of Falcone's empire, had been for some time. She watched Jack Napier arrive the way a chess player watches a piece they cannot quite categorize move across a board they thought they understood. Red Hood 1 arrived masked, flanked, his men positioned with the casual precision of people who had rehearsed the room's geometry without appearing to, who knew which of Falcone's guards would move first, which exits were genuinely clear, which positions in the room allowed the most visibility. He moved toward Falcone's table carrying a suitcase. He told Falcone this was his payment. He told Falcone, and these were the exact words chosen for maximum weight and maximum permanence, that this town deserved a better class of criminal. He said it with the measured certainty of a man who has been holding a line for several years and has finally decided to deliver it, who has rehearsed it in exactly the way an actor rehearses the line they know will define the entire performance. Falcone looked across the table with the expression of a man who has been powerful for long enough to confuse that power with immunity. He reminded Red Hood 1, with the particular contempt of the genuinely comfortable, that he owned Gotham, had owned Gotham for a long time, fully intended to continue owning Gotham. He did not receive implications to the contrary with any particular grace. Then Red Hood 1 opened the suitcase. The object inside was not money, it was alive. A fish, white-skinned, red-lipped, the colors wrong in the specific way that things are wrong when chemistry has been applied to biology at a fundamental level, moved inside its container. The creature had been subjected to a toxin that Jack had been quietly developing for months. a formulation distilled from industrial chemical compounds into something targeted and elegant. The fish was not a threat in itself, it was a demonstration. It was Jack Napier showing Carmine Falcone with the precision of a professor making a point to a student who has failed to grasp the previous lesson. Exactly what kind of weapons were now in the hands of a man who no longer worked for him. The room understood faster than Falcone did, because Red Hood 1 had not been simply planning this meeting, this confrontation, this specific demonstration of independence. He had been building something in parallel for months. The Red Hood gang, the chemical research, the Smilex formulation already being packed into stuffed animals and shipped across Gotham's distribution networks. A weapon designed not for a single target, but for an entire city. The Piranha was a preview. The real production was already in motion. He was not improvising. He had never improvised, not yet. The brawl began with the inevitability of things that have been planned to begin. Red Hood's men moved against Falcone's men in the choreographed chaos of a prepared attack, targeted, efficient, designed to create cover while the principals separated. Falcone moved for the exits. His men moved to protect him. Red Hood's men moved to ensure that the protection was insufficient. Into this entered Batman and Commissioner Gordon, who had chosen this precise night, through their own investigative threads, through the patient reconstruction of Falcone's network, to infiltrate the Iceberg Lounge and make an arrest. What they found was not the clean arrest scene they had planned for, but a full-scale gang war erupting in a high-end restaurant, their primary target fleeing through the kitchen, and a masked figure in a red helmet already heading for the rooftop with a specific destination in mind. Batman fought through the chaos the way he always fights, not against it, but with it, using the confusion of the room as cover and movement aid rather than obstacle. Selina Kyle helped them catch Falcone. It is not entirely clear whether she helped because she wanted Falcone arrested, or because she wanted to introduce herself to the man in the cape. The answer was probably both, and she would not have found either possibility embarrassing. Red Hood 1 left in a helicopter. Below the rotors, swinging in a net, were hundreds of stolen teddy bears, stuffed animals that looked entirely harmless from the air, that looked like the aftermath of a carnival robbery, rather than the raw material of a chemical weapons program. He had more in transit, had been collecting them for weeks. Every bear was already filled. Above the helicopter, Gotham's lights shrank beneath him. Falcone was in handcuffs on the ground below. The city that had employed Jack Napier for the better part of a decade, that had processed him through its criminal infrastructure and handed him back the same professional instrument it had always needed, was finally going to receive something in return. He was going to make it smile. TL. And here is what the game never states explicitly but shows in the structure of what follows. The plan at Ace Chemicals was not just a criminal operation. It was a philosophical argument made with industrial chemistry. Jack Napier had spent years working within Gotham's systems, had accepted its logic and its hierarchies and its transactional nature, had been its instrument in every meaningful sense. The Smilex plan was his rejection of all of it, not a new crime lord seizing power, but a man who had stopped believing that power was the point. The die was cast, the path chosen. Falcone was in custody. But what Red Hood 1 had set in motion at Ace Chemicals could not be stopped by an arrest at the Iceberg Lounge. And the dark thing he was building, the gas in the bears, the plan for the mayor, the argument he intended to make with the people of Gotham, whether the people of Gotham wanted to hear it, was only now beginning to reveal its true shape. What was waiting at the chemical factory would not just change Jack Napier, it would change what the rest of the game was possible. Ace Chemicals occupied a wedge of industrial Gotham in the district known as the Cauldron, a name earned not from metaphor but from temperature, from the density of manufacturing facilities and their heat exchange systems. That made the neighborhood run consistently warmer than the rest of the city, and gave the air there a faint industrial sweetness that residents stopped noticing after a few years, and visitors never stopped noticing at all. The factory itself was neo-Gothic industrial, from that earlier period of Gotham's construction, when the city still believed that industrial processes were worth decorating, worth giving stone arches and vaulted windows, and the visual vocabulary of permanence and dignity. The towers rose and connected with pipes. The pipes ran between storage tanks and production halls. The whole complex blazed at night under halogen industrial lighting that gave everything the specific green-amber quality of a place where organic things go to be chemically altered. Red Hood 1 had chosen it with the same spatial intelligence he applied to everything. It was large enough to house his production. It was defensible enough to resist a moderate law enforcement response. It contained, in its primary synthesis tank, the exact class of chemical compound his Smilex formulation required as a base. And it sat in a district where the kind of industrial activity he was conducting would not attract the attention it might have attracted in a more residential neighborhood. He had been running the operation here for weeks. The teddy bears, hundreds of them, packed in stacked crates in the main production hall, had been modified. Their soft interiors had been hollowed and packed with the chemical precursors that would, under the correct temperature and pressure conditions, release Smilex gas in concentrations sufficient to affect every person within a significant radius. The bears looked unthreatening. They were designed to look unthreatening. That was the entire point. The plan was to distribute them across the city before the gas activated, to use the bears as a dispersal network, a soft and harmless-looking delivery system for something the city had no defenses against, because it had never occurred to Gotham to defend against something that looked like a gift. He had a meeting with the mayor penciled in. His terms were going to be very direct. He told himself this was liberation. He told himself he was offering Gotham something it had always refused to acknowledge it needed. Not law, not order, not the elaborate performance of legitimate authority that everyone in the city already knew was a facade, but honesty. The Smilex would strip the city of its capacity for the specific kind of performative seriousness that had always masked the joke underneath. Every face in Gotham forced to reflect the truth that every street in Gotham already told. What he did not admit, what was not yet available to him as an admission, was that the plan was not really about the city. It was about the man who had been getting closer for weeks, the shadow that had been dismantling everything connected to what he was building, the force that had taken Falcone apart and was now, with the inevitability of a correctly structured argument reaching its conclusion, moving toward him. Batman arrived before the mayor meeting. The infiltration of Ace Chemicals was methodical. Batman and Gordon working through the compound's security with the practiced efficiency of a partnership that had been developing for months, each one covering the other's approach, the two of them moving through the production halls with the specific calm of people who had stopped being surprised by the scale of what Gotham's criminals were capable of attempting. They analyzed the bears. They matched the chemical signatures. They identified the Smilex precursors. They understood completely what they were dealing with. And then the direct confrontation began. The production floor became something that exceeded the vocabulary of a straightforward fight. Red Hood's gang defending the operation with the ferocity of men who understood the window was closing, that the next hour would determine whether anyone walked out of this building with anything intact. Batman moved through it with the controlled violence of a man whose training is the only thing in any room that reliably exceeds the chaos of the room. He fought his way to Red Hood 1. And on a walkway suspended above the largest chemical vat in the facility, the path ran out. The walkway was narrow, suspended over a drop of considerable depth into a concentrate that the factory had been working with for industrial purposes for decades. A compound that had leached into the walls and the pipes and the structure of the building over years of operation, that existed in the air of the facility in trace amounts that made certain protective protocols mandatory. The vat below was not an incidental feature of the room. It was Ace Chemicals' primary synthesis tank. It was the heart of what the factory had always done. Jack had chosen this plant for exactly what it contained. An explosion buckled the walkway's supports. The structure cracked, tilted, became an incline instead of a platform. Red Hood 1 found himself at the lower end of the tilt, his footing failing, his grip on the railing insufficient, the gap between his position and the vat below closing with a physics that had no interest in his plans or his timing or anything he had built. Batman reached out. He grabbed Jack's hand. And here is the moment, the pivot, the specific instant around which the entire arc of both their lives rotates, though neither of them knew it in that moment. Batman held Jack Napier over the vat, held him with the hands that had been trained in the hardest places in the world, built in the specific wreckage of Crime Alley, shaped by the grief of one night into the tools of a person who had decided that Gotham's violence was going to stop with him. He held the man who had killed his parents. He did not know that. He would never know it, not then. Not at any of their 3 encounters, not at any point in this game's story. He tried to hold on. Jack shocked him with a joy buzzer, a small device concealed in his palm, a stage magician's prop converted, as Jack had been converting things from their intended purposes to more violent ones for most of his adult life, into a weapon. The charge was sufficient. It broke Batman's grip. It broke in that single electrical pulse, the only lifeline Jack Napier had. He fell. The chemicals received him. The surface of the vat broke and then closed again. And Ace Chemicals went quiet in the way that places go quiet when the worst thing has happened and the building itself needs a moment to absorb the fact. Batman stood on the fractured walkway over the vat. He had tried to save the man. The man had chosen otherwise. Whether the joy buzzer was an instinct or a decision, that is the question the game embeds in the moment and then leaves unanswered, and both answers are true, and they are both devastating in different directions. If it was instinct, then Jack Napier had been so thoroughly conditioned to deflect any offer of rescue that he did it reflexively, automatically, even when the hand holding him was the only thing preventing his death. The reflex was stronger than the survival impulse. He had been doing the work of Gotham's violence for so long that accepting help had no architecture inside him to receive it. If it was a choice, if he looked at Batman's hand and decided that whatever was at the bottom of the vat was preferable to being saved by the symbol of everything his life had cost, then Jack Napier had already, in that moment, become something neither of them had a name for yet. The vat was deep. It was dark. The compounds in it were doing what they had always been designed to do. Something was happening in the dark. The man who had entered AC Chemicals as Red Hood 1, controlled, systematic, building his argument with industrial precision, was gone the moment he hit the chemical surface. The walkway had given way beneath the man Jack Napier had been building himself into for years. What the chemicals were processing in the dark was not Red Hood 1, not the planner, not the professional. What was being rebuilt was something that had been waiting inside the architecture all along. What does a city produce when it takes a man like Jack Napier, strips every constructed identity down to the base material, and subjects the raw result to something that changes everything it touches? What comes out the other side? He surfaced. The emergency lighting had kicked in over the vat chamber, a dim amber wash that turned everything in the room the color of old metal and old decisions. The surface of the chemical compound broke first, then a hand came through it, pale and slick, gripping the edge of the containment wall with the specific desperation of a body that had not yet received permission from the mind to stop. He pulled himself over the edge. He stood on the factory floor. What the halogen lights revealed was wrong in the specific way that things are wrong when chemistry has been applied to biology at a molecular level. Not the superficial wrongness of injury or illness, but the deep wrongness of fundamental alteration, of something that was one thing being processed into something categorically other. The skin was white, not the pallor of sickness or cold, not the white of fear, the white of something that has had all its original color stripped out rather than painted over, as permanent as the bleaching of a surface that has been treated until there is nothing left to remove. The hair was green, specifically, vividly, impossibly green, the oxidized shade of a chemical reaction that had found the dark pigment of Jack Napier's hair and converted it into something that belonged more to a laboratory result than to any natural palate, more to the vocabulary of chemical analysis than to the vocabulary of human appearance. The lips were red. The whole composition was, in its specific wrongness, complete. It had the quality of a thing that has been designed, not by intention, but by chemistry, to look exactly like a punchline that had been building for a very long time. He moved through Gotham's streets at night, through the districts he had worked, through the corridors of the criminal infrastructure he had mastered, through the city that had employed him and used him, and was still, in the aftermath of Ace Chemicals, running on the same logic it had always run on, as if nothing had happened, as if the man who had fallen into that vat had simply been removed from the equation without any further consideration. He went to a back-alley surgeon, not a hospital. There were too many reasons to avoid the questions that hospitals require answers to, and the kind of injury Jack Napier had sustained would have prompted questions he was not in a position to field with any version of the truth. The back-alley practitioner existed in one of the sections of Gotham that served the people the official infrastructure had no interest in. The practitioner asked the specific questions and none of the others. They worked with the specific tools available in spaces of that kind, and they did what could be done. When they removed the bandages, the room changed. The face beneath the wrappings was the face of a man who would not, could not be mistaken for Jack Napier again. The chemicals from Ace's synthesis tank had done their work too thoroughly, too deeply, too fundamentally into the structure of the tissue to be corrected by anything the surgeon had available or anything any surgeon would have available. The corners of the mouth were drawn up and back permanently in the geometry of a grin, wide, fixed, structurally committed, expressing nothing except the shape of an expression that the compounds had decided would be permanent. The rictus was as absolute as a sentence without a pause. He looked at it for a long time. He told himself it was manageable. He told himself this was a complication to be worked around, a new parameter in a situation that still had workable approaches if addressed correctly. He had been telling himself things in this fashion for years. He was very good at it. The self-deception was a professional skill, refined through the same patient discipline that had made him useful to Falcone, applied now to the project of maintaining coherent selfhood in the face of something that his self had not been built to accommodate. But even as he told himself these things, he could feel the distance between the telling and the believing widening into something that had no floor. He picked up a newspaper. The headline read, "Winged Freak in Gangland." He read about Batman. He read about the arrests, the dismantled operations, the criminal infrastructure of Gotham being worked through systematically by a man wearing a symbol in place of a face. He read about his own operation, the remnants of the Red Hood gang, the aftermath at AC Chemicals, the language Gotham's press used to describe what had been found in the factory. He read it with white hands and permanent green hair, and a mouth that had been redrawn into a grin by forces he had not intended, holding a newspaper that told him the city had moved on without him and had found a new kind of fear to orient itself around. He set the newspaper down. In a voice that was still his, still the voice that had spoken in Crime Alley, that had delivered terms to Falcone, that had managed years of professional composure over something less manageable, he said 4 words to an empty room. "Wait till they get a load of me." And then he laughed, not for anyone, not in performance, not with any constructed intention. He laughed the way something laughs when it has been under pressure for a very long time, and the pressure has finally, completely been removed. Not gently, not therapeutically, not gradually, but all at once. Like a wall that has been showing stress fractures for years finally coming down in a single moment. Like a man who has been holding something together, finding that the thing is already in pieces and the effort of holding it was the only thing that had been wrong. Jack Napier put down everything he had been carrying, the service, the patience, the ambition, the maintenance of a professional face over something that had always been less stable than he allowed anyone to see. He put it all down, and the Joker picked it up. What Batman could not have known, standing in the wreckage of Ace Chemicals above that silent vat, was that the fall had not ended anything. What the chemicals had done was not a death. It was a release of something assembled over years, piece by piece, in the specific conditions that Gotham creates when it uses a man this thoroughly. The Joker did not appear suddenly from the vat. He arrived the way all things arrive that have been building in the dark, completely, and then everywhere at once. And the first thing he intended to do with his new freedom was a question the city was about to receive an answer to, whether it was ready or not. He reappeared in Gotham the way nightmares reappear, familiar, transformed, impossible to dismiss as something already dealt with. The city that had processed Jack Napier through its machinery was now going to meet the Joker, and it was going to do so in every dimension simultaneously. Not through the concentrated operations of the Red Hood gang, not through the focused strategic moves of Falcone's former number 1. The Joker operated on a different principle entirely, proliferating outward in all directions at once, touching everything that could be reached, making his presence felt not as a force competing within the system, but as a force that had stopped recognizing the system as relevant. The first real signal was Harvey Dent. Harvey was Gotham's legitimate hope in the specific painful sense of something that is genuinely good and genuinely doomed. The district attorney who believed, actually believed, without the cynicism that usually accompanied proximity to Gotham's power structures, that the law could work, that institutions could be reformed from within. that the corruption saturating every level of the city's official life could be cleared out by someone willing to do it the hard way. He was running for office. He had allies, including Batman, including the honest fraction of a police department that was majority dishonest. He was, by any available measure, the cleanest version of Gotham's future that Gotham currently had available. The Joker sent mimes, an army of them, silent, white-faced, wearing the visual language of performance and entertainment in a way that made the violence they were preparing to commit somehow more disturbing than if they had arrived in the traditional uniform of Gotham's criminal workforce. The attack on Harvey Dent's public appearance built with the escalating energy of a gag that keeps adding layers, each one worse than the last, each one expanding the scale of what is being attempted without losing the register of the absurd. At the center of it, the Joker appeared with a key lime pie, ordinary-looking, absurd in context, held with the ceremonial weight of something that was absolutely a weapon. He threw it at Harvey Dent's face. The analysis conducted afterwards suggested that the pie had been laced with a diluted version of the same chemical compound class that had bleached Jack Napier's own skin at Ace Chemicals, not in sufficient concentration to produce the Joker's full transformation, but enough to damage the tissue permanently. Enough to leave half of Harvey Dent's face scarred in ways that Gotham's best medical facilities could not fully correct. Scarred in ways that would, over the months that followed, begin to rhyme with the damage of the other kind of corruption Harvey Dent was trying to fight. TL. And here is what most people miss about that specific act, the thing the game embeds in the choice of target. The Joker was not trying to hurt Harvey Dent the person. He was trying to refute Harvey Dent the argument. Harvey represented the idea that Gotham had a legitimate face, that beneath the crime and the corruption and the decades of institutional rot, there was something worth defending, something that could be cleaned up and presented as a functioning city. The pie was the Joker's answer to that idea. The right chemistry applied to the right surface, he was demonstrating, and the legitimate face falls away. The Penguin receives similar treatment. Oswald Cobblepot was running his own mayoral campaign, presenting his criminal past as entrepreneurial experience, performing the transformation from gangster to politician with the self-assurance of someone who understood that Gotham's voters had a high tolerance for exactly that narrative. The Joker disrupted the campaign, not because Cobblepot was powerful enough to constitute a threat, but because Cobblepot had worked for Falcone, and anything that had worked for Falcone was, in the Joker's accounting, a remnant of the old city that had used Jack Napier as its instrument and was now trying to continue operating under new management. He was not being strategic. He was being comprehensive. He was clearing the board. The Flugelheim Art Gallery came next. The Flugelheim was Gotham's most carefully maintained cultural pretension, a place where the city's wealth expressed itself in the specific language of art patronage, where decades of careful curation had constructed an argument that Gotham was still, at some level, connected to beauty and meaning, and the kinds of values that exist above and outside the logic of money. It was not an argument the city made convincingly, but it made it there, in those rooms, behind that security, with those guards and those climate-controlled cases. The Joker walked in with his crew and set to work. What he left behind was not simple destruction. He added to the paintings. He worked on them with the energy of an artist who finds the original conception incomplete, who sees the existing work as a first draft that has been mistaken for a final product, who has additions to make, corrections to offer, perspectives to introduce that the original creator had failed to account for. The result was wrong and vivid and somehow coherent, the visual vocabulary of someone who had developed an aesthetic that the Flugelheim had no category for. Batman and Catwoman pursued him through the gallery, through rooms of modified masterpieces, through the particular chaos of a man treating demolition and continuation as the same activity. What they found at the end was not the Joker himself, but a television. On the screen, he had been busy. He had produced, in the time since he resurfaced from AC Chemicals, a complete commercial for Smilex, the laughing gas formulation that had been Red Hood 1's weapon, and was now being positioned as something the people of Gotham could look forward to personally experiencing. The commercial was polished, cheerful, attentive to the conventions of product advertising in a way that was more disturbing than any straightforward threat could have been. It described Smilex's effects with the specific enthusiasm of a product demonstration. It ended with an invitation. Come to the parade. The parade was real. He had arranged it with a production capability that suggested the Red Hood's organizational infrastructure had not been destroyed at AC Chemicals. It had been repurposed. Floats were constructed, balloons were filled, music was arranged. The money he threw from the decorated platforms was genuine. Because genuine money creates genuine crowds, and the Joker required a genuine crowd. Gotham came. The people came for the floats and the music and the bills raining down from the platforms, came for the spectacle of something joyful in a city that offered very little of it, came in the thousands for the specific Gotham pleasure of a thing that was too good to be true but looked real enough to risk joining. The Smilex was in the balloons. And here is what the game is actually showing you in the parade sequence. Beneath the falling money and the bright colors and the music chosen for maximum irony, a man who had once been paid by Gotham's criminal hierarchy to deliver death had now turned death into a celebration. He had taken the chemical weapon that Red Hood 1 designed for leverage and converted it into a gift. He was not trying to hold the city hostage. He was trying to give it something. Something it had not asked for. Something that would, in his understanding, make it honest at last about what it had always been. He was not trying to win. He was not trying to build an empire or install himself at the top of a hierarchy or negotiate a position within the existing structure. Those were the goals of men who believed the structure was real. The Joker had stopped believing the structure was real. He wanted the city that had made him to understand him, to feel what it was like to be forced to smile. Batman and Catwoman reached the main float, the giant multi-tiered cake construction that the Joker had built as his stage, absurd in its scale, threatening in the specific way that things are threatening when their dimensions exceed what any occasion could genuinely require. The confrontation at the top of the float had the quality of an ending, not a clean one, not a satisfying one, but the kind that actually ends things. The Joker fought them with the energy of a man who genuinely did not have strong preferences about the outcome, not resignation, not surrender. The opposite, the energy of someone who has already made his argument and finds the rebuttal interesting, who is invested in the quality of the fight rather than its result, who is as present for the defeat as he would have been for the victory. They defeated him. Batman sent a grappling line around the Joker's leg, tied him to a section of the float that was already separating from the rest, and gravity completed the argument. The heavy section broke away and pulled the Joker down with it, hard and fast. The impact precise and final. He hit the ground. The fixed grin was still there. It had been structurally committed to his face by the chemistry of Ace Chemicals, and could not be removed by any amount of impact. But there were new scars now, deeper, the jagged marks at the corners of the mouth, carved by the violence of the fall, adding a new layer to the chemistry's original work. 2 falls, 2 catastrophic impacts, 2 sets of damage written permanently onto a face that had begun as Jack Napier's and was now something that required a different vocabulary entirely. The Joker was taken to Arkham Asylum, and he arrived there the way certain people arrive, in places that were always going to receive them, with a recognition, a completion, the specific comfort of a thing, finding the context that fits it exactly. He read through the bars with the contentment of a man who has found his library, surrounded by all the evidence of what Gotham produced when it was left to its own nature, by the company of men and women whose stories were all variations on the same fundamental theme. He had asked in Crime Alley years ago whether anyone had ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight. In Arkham, for the first time, he had the leisure to wait for a serious answer. The die was cast, the arc completed, the story told, from the hitman's gun in Crime Alley to the parade float to the Arkham cell. But the game's developers said something explicitly about this character that is worth sitting with. One person makes this entire journey. Jack Napier at Crime Alley, Red Hood 1 at Ace Chemicals, the Clown Prince at the parade, the prisoner in Arkham. One life, one city. And the question that the full arc leaves deliberately open, the question that connects every version of Jack Napier to every version of Batman, is the one neither of them ever directly asked. And here is what most people miss about the full architecture of Lego Batman. Legacy of the Dark Knight. The thing the developers stated explicitly in their design philosophy, but that the story earns through its details rather than announcing through its dialogue. Batman and the Joker were never strangers. They were never the clean narrative of a hero meeting a monster born in a chemical vat. They were 2 threads of the same city, pulled in opposite directions by the same foundational event. One night, one alley, one gun, running parallel for years before the game's story began, moving through the same criminal infrastructure from opposite angles, serving and dismantling the same power structures from opposite sides of the same moral argument. Bruce Wayne stood in Crime Alley at 8 years old and chose discipline, chose a symbol, chose to become the thing that Gotham's criminals would fear and that Gotham's people might learn to trust. He left the city. He trained in the hardest environments on the planet. He broke himself and rebuilt himself under Ra's al Ghul's instruction into a force that Gotham's criminal world had never encountered and had no framework for. Jack Napier went in the other direction, not in terms of morality, but in terms of the same city's gravity. He went deeper into the machinery, deeper into service, deeper into the hierarchy, deeper into the professional identity of a man who made himself valuable to power in exchange for a position adjacent to it. He accumulated, he observed, he planned. And when the accumulation and the observation reached their conclusion, he broke from the structure, not with Batman's precision, but with a violence and a chemical accident that stripped away everything he had been constructing and left something that had no interest in maintaining anything at all. The game makes one structural choice that changes everything about what the story is saying. Jack Napier killed the Waynes. He is not merely connected to Batman's origin. He is its direct author. He pointed the gun and pulled the trigger on the specific night that created the specific force that would eventually, at Ace Chemicals, reach out across a fracturing walkway and try to hold him over a vat of chemicals. Batman tried to save the Joker. In the most literal, physical, immediate sense, his hand on Jack Napier's wrist over the chemical that was change everything. Batman tried to save the man who had made him necessary, who had destroyed his family, who had authored his grief. The training, the sacrifice, the years of shaping himself into the instrument Gotham needed. All of it built in direct response to the actions of the man he was now holding above a fatal drop. He did not know that. He would never know it. And here is what that creates. The thing the game lets exist in silence rather than in dialogue. A tragedy built not from dramatic irony where one person knows and the other doesn't, but from dramatic irony where neither person knows, where the connection runs below the surface of both their consciousnesses, where the city's violence has made them each other's origin, without either of them having access to that fact. Bruce encountered Jack 3 times, at the Iceberg Lounge, in the chaos of a gang war, within speaking distance of the man who had been in Crime Alley, at Ace Chemicals, at arm's reach, at the grip of a hand over a chemical vat, at the parade in its aftermath, face to face with the Joker and the scarred, permanent grin that was the downstream consequence of a night in an alley years before. 3 times, and not once. Not in a single encounter across the entire game did Bruce Wayne recognize the man he was fighting. The game does not underscore this, does not cut to a close-up inviting the audience to feel the weight of it, does not have a character voice the irony. It simply lets it be there, a gap in the story that the viewer can see but the characters cannot, and trusts the audience to understand what it means. What it means is this. Bruce Wayne built himself into the perfect instrument for addressing what happened in Crime Alley, and in doing so, became something that could not recognize what had happened there. He trained himself so completely past the event that he could stand in front of its author without perceiving the connection. The instrument was perfect. The instrument had been refined at the cost of something essential. Jack Napier became the Joker, not because of one bad night at AC Chemicals. He became the Joker because Gotham is the kind of city that recruits men to do its violence, uses them with precision, pays them adequately, and discards them without accounting for what that discard costs, and then acts entirely surprised by what the discarded thing becomes when it crawls back out of the wreckage. The chemicals did not create what came after. They removed the last constructed facade that stood between the man Jack Napier had been performing for years and the thing that had been building underneath the performance. The vat didn't break him. It completed him. This is the story this game is actually telling. Not a story about a monster born in a chemical accident. A story about a city that keeps manufacturing its worst enemies from the same materials it refuses to stop using, against the same people it refuses to stop discarding, through the same processes it refuses to examine, because the examination would require the city to take responsibility for the product. Jack Napier was never simple, and the Joker is not simple. And the story this game tells about the space between them is not simple and does not reduce to the clean arc of cause and effect, hero and villain, chemistry and consequence. There is a man here who was capable of professional loyalty, of patient construction, of the kind of long-view ambition that could have built something else entirely in a different city, under different conditions, with a different architecture of opportunity available. There is a man who looked at Gotham and saw, before he ever fell into those chemicals, what it actually was, and who had the terrible disadvantage of being right about it. The human truth this story offers is this: what we become is assembled from what we do, and what we do is assembled from what was done to us. And the chain of causality in a city like Gotham runs so deep and so long that finding where it started requires understanding the whole of it first. Jack Napier became the Joker because the city needed an instrument and used him as one. He became the Joker because it valued him as a tool and gave him money in exchange for his future. He became the Joker because the chemicals completed what the city had started, and what the city had started was the slow and systematic erasure of any version of Jack Napier that could have been satisfied with less than this. Close your eyes and picture one last image from tonight's story. Not the parade, not the vat, not the alley. Picture Jack Napier in that back alley room, the bandages just removed, his face rewritten permanently by the chemistry of ACE chemicals, holding a newspaper that tells him the city he served has found a new symbol and moved on, and deciding in a moment of absolute clarity that he will not be the punchline of someone else's story. He will be the one who tells it. The Joker does not make sense as a villain. He makes perfect sense as Gotham's most honest product. A city that runs on corruption and exploitation, and the systematic use of men like Jack Napier does not get to be surprised by what it made. It doesn't get to look at the grin and the green hair and the permanent chemistry-sealed smile and see a monster. It should see a mirror. If you want to stay in Gotham tonight, the full story of Harvey Dent, the man the Joker's chemistry helped turn into Two-Face, the other face of a city that corrupts every good thing it touches, is waiting on this channel. In many ways, Harvey's fall is the other side of Jack's. Two men who each believe something about what Gotham could be, undone by the same violence in the same season, by the same refusal of the same city to be what either of them needed it to be. The link is in the description, and the playlist continues from there.